Tashidelek and welcome to Tibet This Week with me, Pandit Chudin, where we bring you weekly news edition on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's have a look at today's headlines. Chinese court rejects Tibetan rights activist Gonpo's lawsuit against Lhasa Public Security Bureau. United Nations member states deliver joint statement on human rights abuses in East Turkestan and Tibet at United Nations General Assembly. Sikyong Penpa Tsering addresses seminar titled Chartering Tibet's Future in Delhi. Sikyong Penpa Tsering and Deputy Speaker Dolma Teykhang meets the US ICT members. Tibetan Parliamentary Delegation advocates Tibet in Paris and Switzerland. Tibetan Children's Village Schools Upper celebrates 64th founding anniversary. DIIR concludes youth training and symposium on India-Tibet relations in Bengaluru. According to Human Rights Desk of Department of Information and International Relations, in March this year, Gonpo, sister of imprisoned Tibetan entrepreneur Dorji, sued the Lhasa Teykhang District Public Security Bureau for detaining her for 10 days in December 2023 during a peaceful petition in Lhasa. In June, the court dismissed her claims. Since January, Gonpo and her husband have petitioned for a re-examination of her brother's case and visitation rights. Despite her protest, she was forcibly removed multiple times. Her lawsuit sought to revoke her detention and reclaim seized materials, but the court upheld the Security Bureau's actions, denying compensation and rejecting her claims. Dorji has been imprisoned in Chinese prison for over 15 years, with his family increasingly concerned about his health due to reported torture. Despite numerous requests for a fair trial and case review, he remains behind bars and his family has been denied visitation. Dorji was arrested in July 2008 for allegedly supporting Tibetan exiles and protesters and was sentenced to life imprisonment in May 2010. Appeals to higher authorities have been unsuccessful. On Tuesday this week, in a landmark move, 15 UN member states, including Australia, Canada, Japan, the UK, and the United States, delivered a joint statement at the United Nations General Assembly's Third Committee expressing deep concern over a credible report of human rights abuses in Tibet. This is the first time since 1965 that the United Nations has meaningfully addressed China's violations in Tibet at the General Assembly. Australian Ambassador James Lawson delivered a joint statement at the United Nations General Assembly's Third Committee on behalf of the 16 countries expressing serious concern over human rights abuses in East Turkestan and Tibet. The statement highlighted widespread abuses, including arbitrary detention, forced labor, family separations, and cultural repression in Tibet. It urged China to uphold its international human rights obligations, release all arbitrarily detained individuals, and grant United Nations observers access to both regions for independent evaluation.
Chair, as with our concerns for the situation in Xinjiang, we are also seriously concerned about credible reports detailing human rights abuses in Tibet. United Nations human rights treaty bodies and United Nations special procedures have detailed the detention of Tibetans for the peaceful expression of political views, restrictions on travel, coercive labor arrangements, separation of children from families in boarding schools, and erosion of linguistic, cultural, educational, and religious rights and freedoms in Tibet. We urge China to uphold the international human rights obligations it has voluntarily assumed and to implement all United Nations recommendations, including from the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights Assessment, treaty bodies, and other United Nations human rights mechanisms. This includes releasing all individuals arbitrarily detained in both Xinjiang and Tibet, and urgently clarifying the fate and whereabouts of missing family members. Transparency and openness are key to allaying concerns, and we call on China to allow unfettered and meaningful access to Xinjiang and Tibet for independent observers, including from the United Nations, to evaluate the human rights situation.
On 18 October, Sikyong Tsering of the Central Tibetan Administration visited Kumpeling Tibetan Settlement and Teykhang branch for an inspection tour in Sikkim. Sikyong, during his address to the residents of Kumpeling Tibetan Settlement, Sikyong highlighted how His Holiness' vision and the dedication of the older generation helped establish the Tibetan exile community. He explained that this second visit to the settlement aims to strengthen ties between the administration and the public, despite the challenges posed by the dispersed population. Following his visit to Tibetan settlement of Ravangla, Sikkim, Sikyong flew to Delhi to participate in a talk session. On Monday this week, Sikyong Tsering of the Central Tibetan Administration delivered a keynote address during a talk session titled Charting Tibet's Future, the Resolved Tibet Act, Strategies in Exile, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Legacy, and India's Role at an event hosted by the Foundation for Non-Violent Alternatives in Delhi. The event's distinguished speaker includes Sikyong Tsering, Om Prakash Tandon, the founding trustee of the foundation, Major General Ashok Kumar Mehta, Shri Surjit Kumar, a former member of Lok Sabha and former convener of the All-Party Indian Parliamentary Forum for Tibet, also participated in the discussion. The discussion focused on the significance of the Resolved Tibet Act and its potential impact on the future of Tibet and the Tibetan exile community. Furthermore, Sikyong spoke on the importance of Tibet policy and support, deep historical connections between India and Tibet, geopolitical and strategic significance of Tibetan Plateau, and key highlights of the talk on the enduring legacy of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in shaping the global movement for Tibetan freedom and the preservation of Tibetan culture and identity.
That is where we feel that India also has a responsibility in voicing their concerns on what is happening inside Tibet, which is not very forthcoming and which is very, I would at least expect the Indian government to take some position at multilateral forums, if not at bilateral engagements with China, if it is too sensitive an issue. But then at multilateral forums, you have much more leeway. You're working in concert with so many other countries, not necessarily talking only to the Chinese.
On Monday this week, a delegation from the United States International Campaign for Tibet, led by its president, Tenchoy Gyatso, visited the Tibetan Parliament in exile. The ICT delegation met with Deputy Speaker Dolma Teykhang, who provided insights into the structure, history and operations of the Parliament with the guided tour of the Parliament Hall. Furthermore, the Deputy Speaker expressed appreciation for their commitment to Tibet despite the challenges and underscored the critical situation in Tibet under Chinese occupation. On Thursday this week, the ICT delegation visited the Cabinet building to meet with Sikyong Tsering over an hour-long discussion on Tibet. A Tibetan parliamentary delegation, including MPs Geshe Adong Rinchen Gelsen, Lobsang Gyatso Siddhar, and Tenzin Chunjing, began their Europe advocacy tour in Geneva on 19th October. They met with Swiss officials, including Cedric Generate from the Geneva Grand Council and Swiss National Council member Nicolas Walder. The delegation discussed Tibet's critical human rights issues and situation inside Tibet and urged the inclusion of Tibet in discussions on Switzerland-China trade. They also held closed-door meetings with United Nations member states, missions and special rapporteur secretariats, sharing updates on Tibet and stressed on the importance of holding China accountable. On Tuesday this week, the delegation met with U.S. Ambassador Michelle Taylor and thanked her for supporting Tibet during the UN's Universal Periodic Review and discussing further advocacy efforts. The delegation was accompanied by Representative Tile Chuki and U.S. Advocacy Officer Pinzo Topgil. Simultaneously, on 20th October, a Tibetan parliamentary delegation, including MPs Keshingapa Kangri, Tsering Yangchen, Tenzin Jigdel, and Thupten Gyatso, began their Europe-Tibet advocacy in Paris. They visited the Tibetan Weekend School and joined a protest organized by Students for Free Tibet against the Gime Museum's renaming of Tibet to Himalayan World. Later, they attended a public gathering organized by the France Tibetan Association. Accompanied by Representative Teykhang and Coordinator Tsering, the MPs met with French officials, including Deputy Ambassador for Human Rights Thomas Penpa, and discussed Tibet's current situation. They also visited the Musée du Quai Branly, praised by retaining the name Tibet, and gathered information from the Guimet Museum. Additionally, they met Bine Guide, Director of Asia-Pacific Affairs at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On Tuesday, the delegation met François Vauquelin, Mayor of Paris' 11th arrondissement, to discuss the Tibetan democratic process and issues facing Tibetans in France. They also met with journalist Simon Laporteur, Amnesty International representatives, and members of the French Senate's Tibet group engaging in discussions on Tibetan issues and human rights. On Wednesday this week, the Tibetan Children's Village School Upper in Dharamshala commemorated its 64th founding anniversary with a distinguished ceremony celebrating over 6 decades of unwavering commitment to the education and welfare of Tibetan children in exile. The event was graced by presence of former Kowloon Tripa Professor Samdong Rinpoche as the chief guest, alongside notable attendees including guests of honor Khenpo Sonam Temple, Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament in exile, officiating Sikyong cum Education Kowloon Thalam Dolma Changra, and other heads of the Central Tibetan Administration offices and representatives from non-governmental organizations. TCV Executive Director Sonam Sijo delivered a welcome address and presented the annual report. Subsequently, Dr. Anderson, founder of the International Campaign for Tibet in Germany, provided insights on the critical role of TCV in educating Tibetan children. In her address, officiating Sikyong Thalam Dolma Changra offered a brief overview of the establishment of TCV, emphasizing the early challenges faced by the orphaned and malnourished Tibetan children during the initial stages of exile. Following her remarks, Khenpo Sonam Temple, Speaker of Tibetan Parliament in exile, addressed the audience, after which former Kowloon Tripa Samdong Rinpoche delivered a speech. The officiating Sikyong then presented service awards to TCV staff members who have dedicated 20 years of service. The Department of Information and International Relations of the Central Tibetan Administration concluded a 3-day youth capacity building and advocacy training at the Dalai Lama Institute for Higher Education on 18th October. Organized in collaboration with VTech India, the program aimed to empower 35 Tibetan youths with advocacy skills for the Tibetan cause. Sessions led by DIIR's Tukdinki and Tibetan parliamentarians Chumpil Thupten and Lobsang Gyaltso Siddhar focused on Tibet advocacy strategies, social media advocacy, and digital security. Following the youth training, DIIR, along with the Dalai Lama Institute for Higher Education, held a panel discussion titled Why Tibet Matters on 19th October. The panel, featuring DIIR's Tukdinki and researcher Dechen Pamo, highlighted Tibet's global significance, which was attended by 200 participants, including students and faculty of the institute. Furthermore, a symposium titled India-Tibet Relations and the Future Discourse was held at MS Ramaiah University on 20th October, organized by the DIIR, the Dalai Lama Institute, and the Center for National Security Studies. The event featured discussions on historical and geopolitical aspects of India-Tibet relations, with speakers calling for continued dialogue on these critical issues. The DIIR concluded its Tibet outreach program in Bengaluru from 21st to 23rd October, engaging nearly 700 students across multiple universities. Led by Tukdinki and Dechen Pamo, the sessions covered Tibet's human rights issues, the role of the CTA, and India-China relations, fostering awareness and dialogue among Indian students. That is all the news for this week's edition of Tibet This Week. Thank you so much for watching.